Letter number 3. Geneva Accord background. Fertilized with money from the billionaire behind international internet gambling, and endorsed by 4 former heads of Shin Bet, that is, Israel's domestic security agency, would not be expected ways of describing the Geneva Accord. Yet indeed, such is the barrenness of peace hopes that this improbable confluence is a reality. Characterized by one newspaper as furtive, Avi Shaked, age 50, together with his brother Aharon, controls the world's largest group of internet gambling sites. Though he doesn't covet publicity, Avi Shaked's connection to the Israeli peace camp extends back more than 20 years, in particular his association with Yossi Beilin, former Minister of Justice and protege of Yitzhak Rabin, who is a major figure in the Accord's drafting. Although the sponsors pledged transparency, to date, the full extent that Shaked has picked up the tab for Accord expenses is unknown. The plan is to deliver a full copy of the multi-page document to every Israeli household. After 3 years of unfulfilled Sharon promises to provide security for the citizenry, involvement by mega-financiers on the Israeli negotiator side should come as no surprise. Only a series of late-hour court decrees has held up a general strike in Israel by Histadrut, the umbrella labor organization. Insolvencies litter the financial pages. 3 major hotels on the drawing boards before the onset of the Intifada were eventually erected, but now sit vacant outside my window. One hasn't even bothered to open its doors. Less exotic perhaps than Shaked's role, but nonetheless improbable, is the highly public endorsement of the Accord, which Prime Minister Ariel Sharon treats contemptuously as harmful to Israel, by the 4 former security chiefs. Pictured shoulder to shoulder in Israel's largest daily newspaper, beneath a banner proclaiming, "We are on the way to a catastrophe," Yaakov Peri, Avraham Shalom, Ami Ayalon, and Carmi Gilon, each a retired commander of the security service, urged on November 14th the need for a swift political solution. "We are taking sure, steady steps to a place where the state of Israel will no longer be a democracy and a home for the Jewish people," said Ayalon. Israel is no different from other states. It doesn't welcome citizens engaging in private diplomacy, whatever that may say about commitment to democracy. But as was true during the endless years of the war in Vietnam, when, for instance, religious leader William Sloane Coffin, peace activist David Dellinger, folk singer Joan Baez, and other self-designated emissaries accepted invitations to Hanoi, the Accord drafters appear motivated by frustration with their government's unwillingness to hear their voices, rather than conspiratorial intent. In the Knesset, the opponents to the Accord reacted promptly with a measure criminalizing acceptance of assistance from foreign governments for political purposes, such as funding believed to have originated from Switzerland in support of the Accord. Uri Ariel of the National Union Party, who proposed the bill, said his foreign agent law would prevent foreign governments from interfering in Israel's internal affairs. Meanwhile, the Israeli Foreign Ministry summoned the Swiss Chargé d'Affaires to protest that state's action on behalf of the document. The evident intent is to head off other states, particularly European Union members, from likewise backing, or worse, funding the proposal. Though there may be resemblance between it and other non-governmental diplomatic thrusts, the Accord is distinctive. It is above all extraordinarily bold. Only those with lengthy high-level experience could have conceived of this military-like flanking maneuver around Sharon's policies and directly to the people. Moreover, the Accord presents an approach that contrasts both in content and method with the roadmap advocated by the U.S., the European Union, the UN, and Russia. The roadmap, it must be noted, was accepted by Sharon and Arafat, though Israel alone enumerated 14 material reservations. Whatever the degree of acceptance, the signal failure of roadmap diplomacy so far has been nonconformance to its terms on both sides. The situation has been exacerbated by instability on the Palestinian side, with President Arafat forced to govern by proxy, and a mid-course shift of prime ministers from Abu Abbas to Ahmed Correa, an unwillingness of a Bush administration focused on Iraq to pressure Israel, and Israel's open disdain for some of the roadmap's central conditions, most critically, the continuing erection of the so-called fence, which even President Bush has had the chutzpah to characterize, although momentarily, as a land grab. The Palestinians, meanwhile, have not moved to disarm militant factions inside their territories, stating to do so would provoke civil war. Though the trauma and suffering of Israelis attacked by suicide bombers is palpable indeed, I have not heard any Israeli confute the prediction of civil war should Arafat order Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and the Al-Aqsa brigades to surrender their weapons. The most salient distinction between the roadmap and the Geneva document is the latter's methodology, formulation of final rather than interim terms. Instead of outlining a series of signposts along a roadmap to an ill-defined destination, the accord spells out with perhaps daunting clarity what will be agreed upon between the two sides. To the minds of the Geneva participants, the roadmap formulation has proved vulnerable to the zealots' wrecking ball and lethal firepower. Thus, the primary virtue of the accord is to take these opportunities out of their hands, which presents the second saliency. The accord would resolve the most vexing problems. For example, regarding the compound enclosing Temple Mount, the location of Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque, the State of Palestine will be responsible for security and ultimately exercise sovereignty. The Wailing Wall will be under the dominion of Israel. To the dismay of most Palestinian groups, the accord sets out a Palestinian right to return within Israeli borders at the finite number of 40,000. This provision stands athwart the several million potential returnees, but is meant to resolve the Israeli demographic nightmare of Jews living as a minority in the Jewish state.